Hello everyone, this is Dr. Scott Haggerty here for tonight's ADHD and sensory workshop. So we're going to go ahead and get started here in a minute, but before we get started, I would like to ask for your participation. So in the chat box, I'd like you to put in how many of you have a child at home who has been labeled, diagnosed, or suspected to have had ADHD, ADD, sensory anxiety, or emotional dysregulation issues. So if that is so, then how many of you with kids who have been labeled or diagnosed would prefer that they could live a life free of those symptoms without the use of drugs? Make sure you put your answers in, and we want to get an idea of who we're speaking with tonight, and make sure that we give you lots and lots of value here. So I see a lot of the comments popping through already that many of you are exactly here for that purpose, which that tells me that I am in the right room, and I hope that tells you also that you are in the right place. So for those of you who saw the information leading up to tonight, hopefully you saw that I am a pediatric and family chiropractor. And I'm guessing by now you're probably thinking back pain, headaches, or some other types of musculoskeletal symptoms, and what does that have to do with ADHD, sensory, and anxiety issues? Well, moms and dads, my wife and I learned all about this a few years ago, went through personal experience with our own family. We became very interested in what was happening not only with our own child, but in the world all around us. We dove headfirst into the truth and researched it hardcore. We know you didn't come here for our opinion tonight, so we're here to share facts with you that have enabled us to help hundreds of kids in our community and many thousands of kids worldwide. So let me just give you a little backstory as to why we're here. So my wife and I, Dr. Lena Hager, we are both pediatric chiropractors. Our journey didn't start that way. When we actually opened our practice was a rehab practice. And as life would have it, right? So we became parents soon, right before we opened our practice. And my wife had planned for the perfect optimal, like Bradley natural delivery. We went through all the classes, did everything that we could so that we were going to have that outcome. And, you know, as with many of you who are watching here, it didn't go the way that we expected. My wife had an extremely long, very difficult labor. When she started labor, it actually started with something that we did not know was bad. Her water broke first. And so when her water broke, she also started with some pretty rapid, pretty severe contractions. She progressed quickly to a point where, you know, by the time that around 1, so she started her contractions at noon on a Friday, and by about 12 o'clock at night, she was at 2 minutes between contractions. And we made the decision that it was time to make the move to the hospital. We got there and they checked her, and she was already at almost 8 centimeters. So we're thinking any time now. The problem was she didn't progress. She stayed at 8 centimeters for a long time, so much so that the contractions were getting progressively more intense. She wasn't really getting a break. They were relentless on her. And so, you know, after about 26 or 28 hours, you know, we had some decisions to make because she wasn't progressing. We couldn't do anything with all of the natural techniques that we had practiced. She wasn't progressing. And so, long story short, she ended up having to have an epidural, which later led to Pitocin, so that our daughter was able to do the very important thing, which is move out of the oblique position that she was in my wife's pelvis. And I mean, when I say oblique, she was, every time that my wife had a contraction, my daughter's head and face were being jammed into my wife's pubic bone. It caused her tremendous pain with the contractions, and it led to my daughter obviously having an extremely beat up face when she was delivered. The delivery process was really rough. She beat my wife up inside, tore her apart, pretty bad tearing inside, and some pretty bad external tearing. And I watched the labor and delivery process, and it was really hard on my daughter. And so when she was born, we thought something was interesting, that within a few minutes after birth, she was holding her head up, not realizing that this was a bad sign. Moms and dads, if you've seen this with your own child, realize that's not a good thing. A baby is not supposed to be able to go and hold their head up. So soon after she started developing a torticollis, we realized that she had a head tilt. When we put her into her car seat, her head was tilted to the side. And we recognized right away, oh, this is not good. In addition to the facial bruising that she had and some cranial asymmetries that she had developed, that head tilt was a big issue. Because what it turned into, as we started getting into home life, was horrific issues with breastfeeding. She couldn't latch, she couldn't maintain the latch, she was chewing up on my wife. My wife ended up with severe irritation of her breasts, so much so that we went and saw a woman about a tongue tie, and the specialist decided that she was going to clip my daughter's tongue, in hopes that my daughter would feed better, and it didn't help. So she became extremely colicky. She became extremely gassy, extremely fussy, and it progressively got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So the constipation came within about a week or two after we started bringing her home, and it became this evolving issue where she would cry incessantly, constantly gassy. We couldn't put her down. She became hyper emotional, and constipation lasted for several years. And as she got older, even though the issues with the colic and the refluxing began to improve, new things began to evolve. It was the temperament. It was the emotions. It was the meltdowns. And all of these things that we started to wonder what in the heck was going on. And as chiropractors, our daughter had been getting adjusted. So we thought, what are we missing? What do we not know? Why are we not able to go and help our daughter with these struggles that she's having? So as fate would have it, we had met someone, a Dr. Tony Ebel, and as you see on the screen here, the National Wellness Foundation, he is the person who is the head of the National Wellness Foundation. He, coupled with Dr. David Jackson, are two of the world's top pediatric chiropractors. We reached out to him and said, what are we missing? Why can we not help our daughter to overcome these challenges? Because by the time that she's hitting 3.5, the meltdowns and the temper tantrums were getting out of control. Little things like changing clothes, picking out an outfit would lead to a 45-minute to an hour meltdown. I mean, it's crazy things. And moms and dads, I know that you know this, right? Because you're probably nodding your head along with this story, right? Does this make sense? So we reached out to them to say, what are we missing? And how can we help our daughter? And so we talked with Dr. Ebel for quite some time, and he said, listen, guys, he's like, it's not that you're not able to improve her quality of life with what you're doing. He said, but there's pieces that you're missing, and you need to have a better method to understand what's happening and understand the sequence of events that started in your daughter. You need to know where it started, how it evolved, and then ways to go and analyze where she is and the way that her nervous system is adapting or not adapting to the current stresses that she's encountering, and then be able to go and develop a care plan to help to improve her quality of life. So moms and dads, as we start digging in today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about things that you've probably never heard before. But what I want you to know is that as we dig into this content tonight, know that there is a lot of good answers that are going to come your way. There's going to be a lot of great things that we're going to be able to go and teach you so that you can find out how to go and help your child to get out of this thing that we call the perfect storm. So, as we start moving forward here, moms and dads, I want you to, Dr. Lena and I, we've been blessed to go and help lots and lots of families. But part of our larger mission is we want to educate and teach. And so for those of you who are watching this, I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast, the Growing Healthy Families podcast. You can find it on iTunes and Stitchers, wherever you listen to podcasts, and know that you're going to hear stories from world famous health experts as well as parents just like you who've been down this road of trying to help your children. Hear their stories, listen to them, because I guarantee you if you listen, you're going to hear yourself in many of the struggles that these parents went through, but you're going to hear their amazing transformations where their kids went from massive struggles, whether it's ADHD, oppositional defiant, sensory processing issues, whatever it might be on the label, to tremendously better qualities of life over time. So make sure that you subscribe, rate, review, and if there's questions that you want us to answer, let us know. If there's things that you want to learn more about, please let us know. So moms and dads, in our community, we've been able to help a tremendous amount of people. Our goal here tonight is to help you by giving you information that empowers you to make whatever decision is right for you and for your family. We are so glad that you're here tonight. We want you to stay through to the end because as we get done here tonight, I want you to hear the story of Melissa and her son's amazing transformation so you can hear what's possible because her son's story is just compelling. So moms and dads, I know that you're here because you've not given up hope and you're still looking for answers. What we discussed tonight is not a diagnostic or a treatment conversation. It's not a cure. It's an opportunity for us to explain why so many kids are stuck in a neurological storm. Our plan tonight is to restore hope, provide answers, and give you very specific action steps to help your child. So as we go through tonight, I want to talk about a couple of things that we all know. We hear all over the place that it's genetics, genetics, genetics. Moms and dads, it's not genetics. Because nothing changes that fast, right? In the last generation, we've seen an epidemic of kids being diagnosed with ADHD, sensory processing, autism, whatever the label is that you want to put onto it. Genes do not evolve that fast. It takes thousands and thousands and thousands of years to change. So there are certain things that we're going to lay out for you tonight that are going to help you to understand that there is a very specific, very direct cause something that has changed more in the last generation than anything else has. And we want you to understand that, moms and dads, as we put this together for you tonight, the one thing that I want you to understand is this word subluxation. It is the driving force behind why so many kids are struggling so mightily, regardless of the label, regardless of whatever it is. I want you to know tonight, moms and dads, as a doctor of chiropractic, we always joke about the DC, Doctor of Chiropractic, as literally being doctor of cause. As we started digging into the research with Dr. Tony Ebel, one of the things that became very evident is there are patterns. Patterns develop in terms of commonalities that we see from families as their kids go through these neurological storms. And as we go through tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to start connecting the dots. We're going to start looking at the factors, what we call the 3 T's and the 5 D's, that help us to put together the complexities of what your child has gone through and neurologically what is happening to your child that they've gotten stuck into this storm. So let's dig in. So moms and dads, as we get started tonight, let's talk about this thing, the perfect storm. So many kids are stuck in this cycle of stress. The stuff that you see, the symptoms, the output, and it's based completely in neurological disorders and challenges at its foundation. So you have to understand that the reason that we're here is because we found ways to go and alter the way that a child's nervous system was responding to the stressors. And chiropractic, at its root, allows us to tap into and do something to the nervous system that no one else is able to do. So let's talk about where it starts. So I want you to talk about, first and foremost, pregnancy and fertility challenges, because very commonly in this storm, what we see as we take the history is that many of the moms that we have done histories with had a history of fertility and pregnancy challenges. And it can range from things such as difficulty getting pregnant or just a very complicated pregnancy. Maybe you were high risk, maybe there were other health challenges that were present before. One of the big things that we see too is there also tends to be a history of alteration in menstrual cycle, right? So a lot of moms on birth control pills, and then when it comes time to get pregnant, they have difficulty becoming pregnant, so they have to go on fertility meds. But we also tend to find that there's also high level of stress, right? And we know that pregnancy is managed oftentimes more as a procedure than it is a natural event. So keeping that in mind, we know that stress can be a huge challenge. And then thinking about the way that the nervous system of the child is developing, we need to understand how intimately these are intertwined. Because one thing I want you to keep in mind, moms and dads, is that the chemical, the physical, and the emotional stressors that you're adapting to all influence the baby's development. And we talk about this because the way the baby's nervous system develops is very specific. The brain and the nervous system of the baby develops first from the spinal cord up. So what that means is that the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system at the spinal cord level develops before anything else does. At around week 28, the baby's nervous system begins to make a transition so that the higher parts of the brain, what we call the cortex, will start to develop. And it's a very specific, predictable order that it transitions so that the baby's nervous system should become mostly rest, digest, growth, development, healing, because the cortex and the parasympathetic nervous system take over to guide and prep the baby's nervous system for the final stages of development before birth. So there's a number of different things that can happen while in utero that can alter this. Things such as mom being under significant stress, exposure to chemical toxins, physical traumas that may have happened during the pregnancy. All of these things, if they create an environment where mom's nervous system is in stress and secreting cortisol and adrenaline and other stress hormones, all of those things will cross the placenta and influence the baby's neurological development, oftentimes delaying the development of the parasympathetic nervous system. So let's talk about what comes next. Moms and dads, this right here, this is the big thing. This is the thing that sets the stage for everything that comes next from here on out. Because the one thing that has changed more than anything else in the past generation is the usage of intervention during labor and delivery. And moms and dads, I can tell you as a pediatric chiropractor who's adjusted thousands of babies, this by a long shot is the most significant contributing factor in every history and exam that I have done. The kids with the most significant issues with their nervous system are also the kids that have the highest intervention rates. So let's talk about what this means, right? Because intervention is a big term, and a lot of people just think C-section, but it's not just C-section. It's cesarean section, it's vacuum extractors, it's forceps, but it's also the epidurals, it's the Pitocin, it's having episiotomies, it's maybe the baby had a cord wrapped around its neck, maybe the baby was breech, maybe things were complicated, maybe it was a very long labor and delivery process that required more things to happen. And listen, moms and dads, many times these interventions are necessary, but also many times they're not. But know that the baby is not unaffected by these things, right? I know a lot of the moms and dads that we talk to, they think that when a cesarean section is performed that it's easier on the baby. It's not. It's actually much harder on the baby. Because one thing you have to keep in mind is that when a baby goes through the birth canal, in just the standard hospital supine delivery, not like a midwife delivery where they're oftentimes in a more natural position, but just a standard supine delivery on a hospital bed, the amount of force that they'll use in a vaginal delivery is between 20 and 40 pounds of axial traction, which is pulling straight down on the baby's skull and then side to side bending to clear their shoulders and their legs, 20 to 40 pounds. When you get into a cesarean section, per the American Academy of Obstetricians and Pediatricians, that force can be anywhere from 40 pounds on the low end to as high as 60 to 80 pounds. And then if you add in things like the usage of forceps or vacuum extractors, those force ratings can rate up to as high as 120 pounds of force on your little infant's neck. That's the moonwalking bear. That's the thing. Because moms and dads, what's the thing that we always tell everybody, right, when we have a newborn? Protect their neck. Because we all know this, right? What's the very first thing you think? Their neck is weak. It needs protected. But imagine that if someone were to come in, right, and I were to come to your house and I meet you guys and you've got your brand new baby there, and I were to come up and pick your baby up out of the, out of their cradle or out of their swing, and I put an 80-pound weight and start swinging them around by their feet, or swinging the baby by its head with that weight on the feet. What kind of injury would that cause? Now imagine your newborn going through that trauma, and that is exactly what's happening. And moms and dads, I know that at times it's life-saving, but oftentimes those aren't. But there's no way that a baby's neck is going to go through that kind of trauma and be unaffected. And so let's talk about this. This is exactly why it's a chiropractic conversation, because that neurological injury that occurs creates a tremendous level of interference between that baby's body and its ability to connect and talk to its brain the way that it's supposed to. Because when the brain stem is affected, then it triggers a cascade of events that we'll outline here that creates such a stress cycle that the baby cannot break it on its own. Because the brain is the boss, and it needs the nervous system to be balanced and calm. And this kind of a trauma trips the breaker. It literally takes that area of the brain stem, and when that area is subluxated, which means that it's misaligned, stops moving, and it results in neurological interference to the child's brain and body, stress is the only effect that you can get. And so if you're here, it's because the vast majority of the kids, 90+% of the kids that we care for that have ADHD, sensory, autism, all of those things, this is their birth process. 90+%. And so let's talk about what that means. We know that stressed babies have difficulty with eating, sleeping, pooping, their immune systems are weak, start getting ear infections, all of those things. Because let's face it, moms and dads, I mean, what's the next thing that happens, right? They become stressed, sick infants and toddlers. But think about these things, right? So if a nervous system of a child is in stress mode, right? And think about kind of like the primitive development of the nervous system is very simple. So the brain is built so that the stress division of the nervous system, because it's primitive, it's our fight or flight response. You've probably heard this term before. So it's kind of like caveman down by the watering hole. So saber-tooth tiger jumps out to get caveman. Caveman has two choices. I'm either going to fight or I'm going to flee. If he's smart, he's going to flee. When he does that, his brain instantly shuts down all non-vital functions for survival. He shuts down immune function, he shuts down the GI, shuts down the bladder. So shuts down logical thought processes, and he shunts all of that energy into his muscles, into his lungs, increasing the pace and pressure of his blood going out from his heart so that he can continue to move. He secretes boatloads of cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline so that he has more muscle strength. He has greater ability to sustain injury or pain because of the cortisol, right? But what that does, if it's sustained, now it results in his nervous system going through these stages of loss of adaptation, because what it translates into is weaker immunity. Problems with every aspect of the GI, right? From the ability to swallow and digest food, the ability to move food through and make bowel movements, but it also affects the baby's ability to kick on its immune system, because cortisol and adrenaline they alter immune function. So now this weakened immune system results in babies getting ear infections. It results in colic, it results in reflux, it results in the baby developing infection after infection after infection, trouble pooping, all the things that you're seeing on a daily basis. And so what does it cascade into? So we know that by the time that a child is 5, 60% of kids will have had antibiotics, because their immune system is now not able to mount a strong enough fight to help them to deal with common infections like ear infections, even though 80% of those infections are viral and are unaffected by antibiotics. But oftentimes, the very first thing that we're going to give a kid with an ear infection is an antibiotic, even though it doesn't necessarily work. And they get sick over and over and over again. And so every time they get those antibiotics, you know what it does? It weakens their immune response, so they're predisposed to get another infection and another infection and another infection. So moms and dads, this is the epitome of a sick child. And what we see that these things evolve, right? Because how many of you who are watching this, when your child was colicky and your child was refluxing and your child was throwing temper tantrums and your child was melting down, you went to your pediatrician and your pediatrician said, they'll grow out of it, right? Well, not really, because what happens is they don't grow out of it, they grow into new stuff. So they grow into diagnoses, they grow into focus and attention issues, they grow into emotional dysregulation issues, they grow into sensory processing, they grow into autism. Because when the nervous system is stuck and it cannot come out of that state of being stuck in significant stress, and they lose their adaptability to the stressors that they have to deal with, the chemical, the physical, and the emotional, as it gets worse, what ends up happening is their ability to handle common things like infections gets depleted. The ability to go and handle sensory stimuli gets altered because the brain's got this background noise where they can't organize and coordinate the sensory input that's coming in. And in the case of a child that goes down the pathway of being on the spectrum, their nervous system was so stressed, so weakened, that all of a sudden, if it's regressive, when something comes in and causes their nervous system to go over the tipping point, their brain says, I have to disconnect, and they regress. And moms and dads, if you saw this yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because this is something that happens so often. All right, 1 in 48 kids with autism, right? 1 in 5 kids being diagnosed with some type of a neurological developmental condition. So moms and dads, as you look at this screen, so this is a very, very important quote written by a brilliant man, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is the author of the book called The Biology of Belief. And he is the person who is the founder of the movement called epigenetics that many of us have heard of. And so when he talks about the nervous system, he talks about the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. And so when you look at this, what are you drawn to in this sentence? I would venture that if you're here tonight, probably the majority of you see the word behavior, right? Because that's what we think about. But always have to keep in mind, moms and dads, this is because you're looking to help the output. We need to look at the input, at the internal environment inside of our children. All of these challenges start first and foremost with perception. Keep in mind, they are idling at a high level, so they have trouble handling the environment. Their brain is having a difficult time perceiving things and then coordinating appropriate responses to the environment on a daily basis. And let's face it, moms and dads, our environment hasn't changed that much. If anything, it's probably gotten better. The big thing that's changed is how we bring kids into the world, right? On a day in, day out, year in, year out basis, 87+% of all labors and deliveries in the United States have an intervention. That is per the Department of Health Statistics. So look this up for yourself, but you have to understand, this is the biggest thing that's changed more than anything else. And so keep in mind, when we talk about this is very much the key word. All of the cells, so the entire nervous system is directly affected. What we see is that our kids' ability to adapt to stress is worse than ever before. And so moms and dads, you have to remember the job of the nervous system is to adapt to the environment that they are living in. And if they get stuck in stress early and stress often, what we call the 3 T's, then they get stuck there. And if stress is coming in, then all that we get back out is stress. And so moms and dads, let's talk about this, because you have to understand that the way that the nervous system is built to work is very specific. So we talk about this term constantly, nerves that wire together, fire together. And so when we talk about the way the brain is controlled, right? So the brain is a very specific program. It regulates our nervous system through what is called the autonomic nervous system. It's got two very specific divisions, right? We talked about these earlier, right? The rest, digest, growth, development, and healing side called the parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system, which is what controls fight or flight responses. Our children, our babies, should be spending the vast majority of their time, both awake and asleep, in parasympathetic, because that's what controls logical development of the brain, right? Prefrontal cortex, all executive function, and limited amounts of time, right? Infants no more than 5% of their time in stress mode, because it's when they're, they need to eat, or when they need changed, right? Or when they're gassy, whatever, when they need attention from mom and dad. But they should rebound. The problem is like a teeter-totter, what's happening is it's imbalanced. So instead of the brain being able to regulate stress as they should, what's happening is the brain is getting stuck on stress. And nerves that wire together fire together means that anything the brain does a lot of, it gets really, really good at. And because so many kids' nervous systems are being stuck in stress mode right from birth, then they cannot come back out of stress mode because they're being bombarded constantly with noise. And so think about it like this, Mom. So this is a neurochemical system. The neurosystem controls the chemical system. And so when a child's nervous system is living constantly in stress mode, then it's tripping on things called their adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands are what put out cortisol and adrenaline. They live on top of the kidneys. They work for the sympathetic system. They kick this stuff out constantly. And what it does is it triggers the nervous system to get easier and more efficient at turning on stress when there is a stressful situation. So these nerves that wire together fire together means the brain is changed so that it's used to living in stress mode and it gets more and more efficient at it. The problem is the evolution of this becomes more and more of these symptoms that we see where our child's temperament over time gets shorter. Their aggression becomes worse. Their focus and attention becomes shorter. They take more and more redirects. They become more difficult to manage. We see more and more issues with emotional dysregulation. All of these things, in addition to the ear infections and the weakened immune system and the development of things like the chronic, tonsils being inflamed and the strep infections, and we see the sensory processing problems all developing because the brain's living with noise, so it can't organize the input. And we talk about this concept of this thing that's called the subluxation. In subluxation, I mentioned this earlier. You have to remember this is a really critical concept because the subluxation equals stress. It is at its root a basic sensory processing problem because the brain is built to be able to adapt to the chemical, physical, and emotional stresses that we encounter on a daily basis. But what the subluxation does is it literally robs the brain's ability of its ability to adapt to the stressors that are coming in, because what it does is it trips the stress division of the nervous system on, like we talked about before, so that it can no longer adapt. And the longer that the brain is stuck in stress mode, the lower the adaptability becomes. And when we talk about this subluxation, where is its most significant connections? Brainstem, right? For many of those who are old enough to remember Christopher Reeves, right? Remember what happened to him. So when he fell off the horse and broke his neck, he was paralyzed from the waist down, but he severed this very important nerve that we'll dig into later called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the nerve that regulates all of our body's maintenance processes: heart, lungs, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, pancreas, adrenal glands, kidneys, gut-brain connections. But it's also what drives our brain to keep in logic mode. It's what drains our inner ears and our sinuses so that we don't get constant sinus and ear infections. It's a really, really important nerve. And when the brain has interference to its ability to connect and communicate from the brain to the body via the spinal cord, because of this kind of an interference, no system in the body can work the way that it's intended to. And so keep in mind, moms and dads, that this pattern of interference, the longer that it's on, the more that it suppresses the brain's ability to organize the input coming in, right? And that's sensory processing at its root. And it's really important that we keep in mind that the spine balances and regulates neurocommunications. Because if we think about this, right, many of you who have kids that are dealing with stress modes, right, where they're living in stress, they're dealing with ADHD and anxiety and sensory processing challenges and oppositional defiant disorder, whatever it might be, right? Think about the way this works. Stress breeds stress. And you know this because you've been down this road before, right? So you've probably tried all of the rewards with your kids, right? Stickers, treats, toys, trips to Disney, trips to the moon, whatever it might be, to get them to calm down, right? To get to change their behaviors. But what you see is that your child probably says to you every time they have a temper tantrum or a meltdown, I don't want to be this way. Or I know I should do this, but I can't. It's because their brain is living at such a high level of stress that they literally don't know how to switch gears. because their brain is so easy, it's so efficient at turning on stress mode, they can't shut it off. And think about it too, right? We talk about nerves that wire together, fire together. Well, who also loses it when your kids lose it, right? Many of us do. Our kids flip out, so we flip out, and tempers raise, and we yell, and we scream, and we punish. And think about this. This reinforces this entire nervous system cycle of nerves that wire together, fire together, because the same cycle escalates over and over again, and the same pattern develops again and again and again. And so as we talk about this, we have to start talking about how do we actually get in there and switch gears? Because if a child's nervous system is living in non-stop stress, how do we change it? Well, moms and dads, let's start digging into how do we actually get in and get the child's brain out of stress mode. So let's give you a quick example here, moms and dads. So this is my little buddy Dominic. And so Dominic was a little dude who was living with severe oppositional defiance disorder and severe anxiety. And so temper tantrums were the regular. I mean, we happen to know this little dude, and we've seen him around, and we've seen him have such massive meltdowns where mom and dad literally had to remove him from social situations just because they couldn't control him. They couldn't back him down. They couldn't calm him down. And in just a matter of months, moms and dad, his mom and dad report to us massive improvements in his anxiety, right? Like to a point where, he couldn't go into school most days without having, meltdowns and temper tantrums and anxiety. And they said it's essentially done. So his ODD is almost gone. Temper tantrums are significantly reduced, like more than 75% reduced from where we started. And the cool part about it is that there was no other intervention other than adjusting him, stimulating his vagus nerve to depress his stress response, balance his stress and rest and digest response out, getting his brain to start to reorganize and calm down the way that it was supposed to. So moms and dads, let's talk about this really important nerve called the vagus nerve, because we need to understand how we're going to be able to calm down the brain using an adjustment. So here's the big thing. This vagus nerve is the single most important nerve for us. So it's a cranial nerve and is the only nerve that goes into all of our major organs. So this nerve comes right off the brainstem. You see the yellow line there, right where the brain is. You look at that line of that nerve, and it goes down and it goes into our esophagus and trachea, goes into the lungs, the heart, the liver, the pancreas, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine. It talks to and controls every major organ in our body. But you also have to keep in mind, because this nerve is directly connected into the prefrontal cortex, it's also responsible for keeping our brain, so it controls social, emotional, and cognitive development. Because 85% of the nerves in this one nerve are sensory, which means they feed the brain with information up so the brain can have proper output based upon the input. So think about it like this, right? When we have a stress event, our brain will, because of stress, right, will accelerate the heart. But the vagus nerve is what slows the heart, lowers the blood pressure, calms down our breathing because it controls our lungs. It also goes into our stomach and our small intestine and large intestine, and it will control and initiate all digestion as the brain stress process ends. So this is why so many kids with neuro challenges have digestive issues and can't do things like either gain weight or they get constipated like crazy, because this nerve isn't working the way that it's supposed to. But the other side of it is this nerve is also the one that's most sensitive to toxins, because we talk about that balance, the chemical, the physical, and the emotional stressors. We have a lot of chemical exposure from meds or external toxins. This nerve is also going to be directly affected by it significantly. And so think about it like this. Subluxation creates too much gas pedal and not enough brake pedal. This nerve is the brake pedal. And because you cannot be in growth and protection at the same time, then think about this. Chiropractic is vagal nerve stimulation, and it is the absolutely most safe and potent way to accomplish this. So let's talk about the most important pieces here of this equation. So the 5 Ds that our kids go down start with this thing called dyskinesia, and that is the subluxation complex, the misalignment and the fixation component. Because subluxation equals stress stuck on, but it happens not only when a vertebra moves out of its normal position, but it stops moving. And why that matters is that when the bone stops moving, we lose this really critical sense called proprioception. And we have to have this for our brain to be able to regulate where we are in space. And so keep in mind, moms and dads, right? Most of us think about chiropractic very much like bone out of place, but really the fixation is a way bigger piece of what we work with, because when we return motion along with alignment, the brain kicks the stress response off and stimulates the vagus nerve and turns it on. And think about it like this too. You cannot have a musculoskeletal structural issue without it also being a neurological issue, because all things run through the brain because it's the master controller. Is this making sense? So let's think about it from this perspective, okay? So when a misalignment creates a fixation, fixation is the big problem. It alters the movement and alters the function of the brain. Adjusting gets the nervous system moving again. Movement calms and connects the brain. Subluxation is a movement problem, a motor problem. And so let's take a look at something here just to kind of illustrate the point. So this was a research study that was done in an osteopathic clinic. And if you don't know much about osteopathic medicine, they are doctors who actually have some training in analysis and palpation of the spine. And so in this clinic, so the doctors of osteopathy here, they went through and they motion palpated, they moved the necks and skulls of 100 different babies that were part of this research study. And they found that 99 out of 100 of the infants in this study had at least one pattern of subluxation found. And so if you think about that, that means that 99 out of 100, 999 out of 1,000 had a pattern of subluxation, if you extrapolate this out. And this is a big deal, because if they are having these patterns of subluxation from birth, it means that the majority of our babies are being born with interference to normal neurological development. And I don't know about you moms and dads, but the idea of having anything interfering with my child's health is not okay with me. Because as a dad as well, right, I would do anything to make sure that my children are living life at 100%. And if something is taking them down to 85%, that's not okay. Well, if we know that 99 out of 100 infants are born with a pattern of subluxation, and it's robbing them of their ability to adapt to the stressors that they're encountering on a daily basis, I would do anything to make sure that I got that corrected so that my child could live life at 100%, because that's all I care about for my baby. So here's a quick research study that was done, great study that was done by Dr. Heidi Horvick. And it illustrates that the part of the brain affected by each adjustment is the place called the prefrontal cortex. This is the reason why what we do gets such profound results in the kids that we work with. Because when you change the way that the prefrontal cortex works, over time a child's brain rewires and refires, and it begins to activate and coordinate and control the prefrontal cortex the way that God intended it to. So they are able to rebuild better executive function, better emotional regulation, better focus and attention, better sensory processing, better stress responses overall, better immune responses, because the immune system gets rebooted when the prefrontal cortex gets rebooted. Really, really, really powerful concept for here when you take this study into context, moms and dads. So moms and dads, as you watch this video, I want you to realize this is what so many of our babies are going through on a daily and weekly basis when they're born. So as you watch this video, moms and dads, this is a cesarean section with a vacuum extractor, and I want you to watch this all the way through. And I'm sorry if any of you have a bit of a weak stomach, but you have to see this, because this is the real deal of what's happened to babies every day.
Getting irritated.
Pumping up the vacuum extractor, pulling on the baby's skull, right?
Come on, buddy.
Now watch what comes next.
Here's little girl. Make it cute for the camera.
Now watch this. Look at the side bend. Pull, side bend, and look at that baby's feet. Did you see that baby's feet come off of the table? Right? Watch here. See that? That's the baby's feet hanging. That is that baby being hung by its head, right? Feet off the ground. That happens to babies every single day. You hear it? They're calm. It's like no big deal. But this is what is happening to baby after baby after baby, time after time after time. Moms and dads, when you watch this, I want you to realize that this close up here, this is what's really happening. I mean, look at the amount of force in that poor baby's neck. So that is at least a minimum of 40, if not 60 or more pounds of traction on that baby's neck. And this is happening to our babies every single day. Think about that. Right where his fingertips are, So you see that that's right where the vagus nerve lives. Think about the amount of stress that's being put in there. That's neurological injury at its core, moms and dads. And so when you take this into context of realizing why we see so many kids that are dealing with stress and struggling to adapt, this is where it all starts. Single time. Because disafferentation, what you need to think about is its abnormal input. Afferent means the brain is getting normal input from the spinal cord and the spinal nerves in the spine. Disafferentation means it's altered. It's not coming the way that it should. And what we're talking about is we need this sense called proprioception to work as it's supposed to. Proprioception is your perception of movement. And think about it like this, moms and dads. Okay, so I want you to close your eyes, put your arms out at your side, 90 degrees away from your body. Without looking at your fingers, I want you to wiggle them. Do you feel them? You know that they're there, right? You feel your fingers moving even though you're not looking at them. That's proprioception. It is the single most important sense because that one sense refines all of your other sensory input coming into the brain. So at any point in time, 90% of your brain's work in the background is to that one sense. That tells you just how important it is. Now think about it like this, moms and dads, and this is very, very much why chiropractors get the results we do with this. 60% of the proprioceptor muscles live on the spinal column. That is a lot. With the next densities being down in the jaw, in the SI joints, and the feet, and then the hands. Which is why we see so many kids will stim and have overflow movements to try and calm their brains using external movements. Anyone seen this with your own kids? If you did, put it in the comment box. So now, 33% of that 60% comes from the upper neck. Now think about that, moms and dads. That is the place that is most dramatically impacted by the labor and delivery process, the upper neck. The main breaker to the entire nervous system, and it got blown right at birth. So all of those things that we talked about, the vagal nerve effects, right? The symptoms, the stuff that we see, right? The inability to digest food properly, right? The reflux, the GERD. So the inability to drain the ears, the ear infections, and then the strep infections, or the constipation issues. And then we start seeing things like we talked about before, the sensory issues, the focus and attention issues, the emotional issues. All of these things that evolve next, they all start there. And many of us have kids that will develop tics, right? So, and kids will stim to get the movement in to calm the brain because the spine isn't doing the job. This is an artificial way for them to do so. And they develop tics and overflow movements constantly. And the neck is the most sensitive area of the spine, so kids will move their head around a lot. We'll see this constantly. The next most sensitive we talked about is the jaw and the tongue. So you'll see, kids doing things with oral fixations like chewing and moving their jaw constantly. We talked about the hands and the feet, which is why sensory kids tend to walk on their toes. I'm sure many of you are resonating with this right now because I'm sure a lot of you have toe walkers. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is that they're perceiving fight or flight at all times, because when they have a fixation, when the spine isn't moving, the fixation translates into this stuff called nociception, which equals noise. Moms and dads, for a moment, I want you to put yourself in the position of being in a room, no one else is around, and you're just listening to Metallica nonstop. Think about what your mental state would be like when you've got this going on. Now, let's take your ADHD child. I want you to imagine that you're in their shoes and you go into a room and there's 100 people there. And you're trying to have a conversation with a person standing across from you. And you hear every conversation all at once, including the one that's going on in front of you. And Metallica is on in the background, and you can't block any of it out because you can't do so. Moms and dads, disafferentation means their filter's broken. Their brain cannot control the input. So in turn, what we see then is we see alterations in output, and that results in the next D, which is called dysautonomia. And Dr. Bruce Lipton said it best. You cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. Because think about this, right? The autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight and rest and digest nervous systems, they control 99% of what goes on in the body. And since you can't be in growth and protection at the same time, there's only one choice. So if you're going to go and get the brain to calm down, you have to rebalance the autonomic nervous system. Because at its root, the subluxation is very much a sensory processing problem. And so for the brain to be able to reorganize, we have to change the way the subluxation works by getting rid of the subluxation with adjusting, keep it in motion so the brain is able to rewrite the pathways so it can reorganize and calm itself down. Now, what we talk about next, what you guys see, the symptoms, is this thing called dysponesis. This is a really important thing to keep in mind because this is errors, abnormal energy output, errors in energy output. And so by the time that a child's nervous system is wound up for a long period of time and gotten to a point where that child's nervous system can no longer regulate the output, we see ADHD, ADD, SPD, OCD, whatever the label of the diagnosis is, it doesn't matter to us. Because what we care about is we have to get to the cause. We can't just continue to treat the symptoms and expect to get a different result. We need to get the brain to change so the output, the dysponesis, so we can change that. So we can get normal energy output again. So we need to go and change the input so we can change the output. So as we move forward, moms and dads, keep this in mind because this is the most critical thing about what the adjustment will do for your child's brain. So let me go through a couple of different things for you. So you need to understand that part of the way that we have to look at your child is we have to have a method of analysis, and we use scans. And so big thing you have to keep in mind is that we look at the scans because they tell us what's going into your child's brain and what's coming out. And so this scan here is one of our primary measures. This is what's called a surface EMG. So anytime that you see on these scans, if you see white, white is good, anything other than white is bad. Because this is the energy going into your child's brain. The way that I describe it here is the surface EMG is kind of like the energy into the muscles going up to the generator, which is the brain. Too much in equals too much out, or if it's too disorganized, then we get disorganized output. We want these scans to be as calm as possible. These are just samples, but we use patterns. Pattern analysis is how we're able to tell what a child has coming in and how we're going to alter the output. You look at this scan, moms and dads, and this one here, man, this is gold. This is called the heart rate variability. In healthcare, this one scan is considered to be the gold standard for the balance and function of the autonomic nervous system, how well you adapt to stress. So if you look at the scan on the left, so the white dot on there represents that individual scan. That individual's scan shows that they are veered off towards the left side of the scan, which is the fight or flight side. And green is the normal limit zone for adaptability. Yellow is 1 standard deviation outside of normal adaptability, orange is 2 standard deviations, and red is 3 standard deviations. We want all of our children to be in the very middle of that green box between 95 and 105. That's optimal variability for a child. The black dots or the black lines around the outside, that's the adult variability zone. We want all of us to be within that zone. The lower that our adaptability gets, the more the output, the symptoms, the anxiety, the OCD, the ADHD, the whatever it's going to be, the worse it gets. And it doesn't have to be veered off completely to the sympathetics, but if our stress reserves are low, it's kind of like teapots, right? And think about it like this, moms and dads. The way the nervous system is built is not too different than a teapot, right? If you were to take 2 teapots and you put them on the stove at the same time, teapot number 1, you turn up to level 8 with full of water, and teapot 2, you turn up to level 2. Which one's going to boil first? The one on level 8, right? So the one on level 2, probably not even going to boil at level 2. And if it does, it'll take a very long time. That's how we are supposed to work. But the problem is the majority of our kids and many of us, we're at level 8 constantly. And so think about that. If we're living at level 8, then we literally don't have any ability to adapt to the stressors of the world around us. The goal of every care plan is to get every child's or every adult's variability back into that green zone and then stay there. Because what we know has happened is when they achieve that is that their nervous system is changed. It's rewritten the operating system on how they adapt to stress. That tells us the success of our adjusting program over time so that we can get a child's or an adult's brain to be able to adapt more effectively to stress. This is what's called a thermal scan. So moms and dads, many of you by this point in time may have heard things about brain balance. This is where we can see brain balance. So if you look at the scan on the left side, right, the entire right side all lit up. So on the left side, on the right side, that scan is quite a bit better. So colors matter on this one too. White is within normal limits, green is 1 standard deviation above, blue is 2 standard deviations above, red is 3. We want as many whites as we possibly can get, but we also want balance. We look at this one as a month by month output change from that child's brain as it's registered via the spinal cord. So very, very important measure so we can track where we're heading. So moms and dads, I want to get you a case study here because I think it's important that we have an understanding as to what it looks like, common patterns. And so my buddy Elias here, when he first came in, oh my gosh, did he have a ton of things going on. He had massive sensory behaviors, stim like crazy, upset by noises. He would, and his mom will tell you this here in a moment, like he would get very upset if he heard his baby sister crying, had lots of issues with focus and attention, seemed totally disconnected, poor to no eye contact, constant tantrums and meltdowns, aggression at times, way behind on speech. He was a toe walker, poor balance and coordination. So here are Elias's initial scans. And so if you look on here, this is what a surface EMG looks like when a child has too much background noise, too much coming in, and it's totally disorganized. And so if you look on here, you see those reds and blacks all over the place. If you look on the right side there, there's a pattern where it says total energy index 618.4. Just so you have context, moms and dads, the normal range of energy for kids and adults is 100 to 150. He was 6 times normal, which explains all of the behavioral patterns that we saw. Now, pattern of distribution, symmetry of distribution. What that tells us is what's coming into the brain. The brain has an expected order or magnitude or distribution of input coming in through the nervous system. When the pattern is off to this degree, right, it should be between 85 and 95% is our ideal zones. This is less than half, which means everything that's coming in is completely disorganized. So, which explains disconnection, problems with focus, problems with attention, inability to go and regulate sensory input because his brain couldn't put it all together. Symmetry of distribution, we want to see that hit 85%. But what we see here is a pattern that's just blown out. Now, as we step forward, this is Elias's change over time. Big, big, big improvements in energy. And honestly, moms and dads, in this case here, we know that a lot of these things take time. But if you look at where he was to where he is, right? Energy level now is 139.4, patterns up to 63 and still in progress and making great gains, and symmetry at 74.8. Are we done? No. But we've made tremendous, tremendous strides from where he was when we first started. So moms and dads, I'm going to let you listen to Melissa, his mom, so she can tell you her story.
My name is Melissa Bartnicki, and I brought my son into care with Dr. Scott about 1.5 years ago. My husband and I were noticing some things with him that were not typical for kids his age. There was a lack of eye contact with us when we would speak to him. He was having meltdowns and tantrums over silly things like if all the doors in the house were not closed, he would have a meltdown. It was sort of an obsessive thing. He was putting everything in his mouth as a 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old, which is not typical. And he just seemed to be kind of in his own little world, disconnected, and we knew that that was not normal. So we actually stumbled across Elite through a Facebook ad and came and saw Dr. Scott's presentation, The Perfect Storm, and I realized that this is what my son needed, so we brought him into care, and almost immediately we started to see our son calm down, and his focus began to come back. He started making better eye contact with us, and just his overall quality of life was better. He was interacting more with his peers and with the family members over time, increasingly over time. And we even noticed his motor skills became more fluid. He wasn't as clumsy. Even when he would run, he would seem to run more fluid. And he's really just a different little boy right now. He just turned 5. And actually today we completed his care plan with Dr. Scott, and we're just very pleased with what we have seen, the changes in his life. So we're just very grateful for Dr. Scott and his care here at Elite.
So moms and dads, I hope that that story gives you a really good understanding of what is possible. I mean, when we first met Elias, he was in a state of tremendous struggle, and his mom was really desperate to get him some help. And like I mentioned to you at the very beginning, right, when you hear her story, I hope this gives you some inspiration and hope that this is real, that this kind of change is possible for your child, and there was no medicines that were all used. So we actually have a podcast with Melissa that will actually be out at any point in time, potentially even before you see this video. But watch it, because she goes into much more depth about their struggles, along with a lot of our other moms that share their stories of change for their own children. Some very similar, some significantly worse than Elias, but all seeing massive changes in their children's health. So let's talk about the four most common effects that we expect to see. During the course of care, first and foremost, we want to see your child get calm, right? And this is what you want. We want to see their brain begin to calm down. We want to start seeing better control. We want to start seeing more connection. And we want to see improvements in coordination. All of the things that Melissa just told you right there are our common expected effects. Now, moms and dads, I want you to know that this is not a one adjustment thing and the brain is going to change. It's a process. Changing a child's brain is going to take us time, but that's why we walk through this together. And so as we go through this process, I want you to understand the way that we're going to work together starts by getting information. So what we need to do is, when we get done here tonight, what I need you to do is I need you to click the link. I need you to follow through, and let's get your child set up for a complete history and examination, because the only way that we can know what needs to be done is for us to start getting information. And so as a part of this process, what we're going to do is we are going to, first and foremost, do a complete history. We're going to have you fill out a complete history, full backstory, so we can start playing Sherlock Holmes. We'll get together on the phone and we'll spend as much time as necessary to get the information together so that we can come up with a complete picture of what your child and your family has been through. Then we'll do a physical exam. The physical exam is a complete neurological exam, as well as the neuroscans that you saw before. Then we'll sit down and do what's called, at a third visit, what's called a report of findings, which means once I've sat down, analyzed your child's history, analyzed your scans in depth, I'll come up with a care plan. And we'll come up with a care plan that will give us both the time and the frequency necessary to get your child's brain to change, to start seeing momentum, get things moving in the right direction, and then stay at it until your child's brain completely rewires, till we get them to a place where they're seeing a better quality of life both at home and at school. Moms and dads, I know that every single one of you that's sitting here, if you're wondering if this can help your child, the only way that we can find out for sure is you got to go and get the information. So make sure you click the button. Let's go ahead and get that exam scheduled. Let's make sure we get that history, and then let's start getting results. So moms and dads, you're probably asking yourself right now, what's next? Well, first and foremost, we need to get a complete history so that we know the entire equation here that we're working with. So we need to get a full physical and neurological exam on your child. So this way here we can find out where there's subluxations, find out what the 3 T's and the 5 D's, what they're doing to your child's nervous system. We need to run a complete neuroscan, the scans that we showed you before, so we can get that 360-degree view of what is happening inside your child's nervous system. And then we need to get together and have a comprehensive report of findings so we can talk about what is our plan of action so that we can calm your child's brain and start getting them the quality of life that they deserve. So moms and dads, we talked about our action steps, but let's take it one step further, because I know that many of you probably still have questions. And if you've not made a decision yet about what you want to do, throw your questions up in the chat box, and I will make sure that we get every single last question answered so that you can get the answers to go and help your child to get the help that they need. So second thing is, let's talk about reducing those 3 T's. And so we'll dig into, on the podcast, all the ways that you can reduce the chemical, the physical, and the emotional stressors on your child. And then, of course, moms and dads, get your child scanned. The webinar only special is only good for 24 hours. So make sure you get your child's exam scheduled ASAP before that pricing goes away. Because we want your child to live the quality of life that they deserve to live. So get them scanned, get it set up, take action now while that pricing lasts so we can get your child on the road to better health. This is Dr. Scott. God bless you guys. Be elite.